Last week, we launched a new sermon series on Mother's Day on the book of Esther. And we've entitled this sermon series, The Hidden Hand of God. And last week, we looked at how God is moving and working behind the scenes, beneath the surface, even in and through Esther's many challenges that she faces, as God calls her and he has a purpose for her life, and he has brought her to exactly where he wants her to be for this particular purpose and calling to rescue and save his people. And so we looked at and saw how God was with her everywhere she went. And again, as challenging as that was. And if you remember last week, we just, in opening the book of Esther, in the very first verses, we read of King Ahasuerus, King Xerxes of Persia, and his great pride and his excitement to invite all of his nobles, his princes, those who are in influence, his military officials to come and see his greatness, see his wealth and all that he has accumulated, or rather all that he has inherited from his father. But he hosts this big fancy banquet followed by a 6-month tour of his kingdom and showing them all of his trinkets and treasures and all of his impressive wealth. And then he closes that time with another banquet, this time inviting everyone. He invites the lowly and the wealthy, the influential. He invites them all to come to the 7-day banquet filled with food and drink. But believe it or not, there is yet another in this story, in this book of Esther, who competes with King Xerxes in terms of pride. That Xerxes is not the only one in this story, in this book, who struggles with pride. And that is the man we were introduced to last week, named Haman. And that's who we're going to be looking at and talking about this morning. If you remember Haman from last week, he was an official of Xerxes, and he became very angry with Mordecai, Esther's relative, who refused repeatedly to bow before him and to pay him homage. And so Mordecai conspired he carried out this plot to convince the king to have all of the Jews slaughtered, all out of his hatred for this one man, Mordecai. But as we're talking about pride this morning, I want to begin by just saying we have a tendency when it comes to pride we hear a sermon about it and we want to point the finger at, this is going to be about so-and-so. Oh, this is going to apply to my boss or my coworker or my neighbor or my relative, that one that I stay away from every Thanksgiving. Or I can't wait to share this message. Or, I'm glad that so-and-so is here to hear this message too. I hope they're taking notes. No nudging the people next to you. But it's so easy for us, and it's natural for us to think about all the other people that a message on pride pertains to point to all the Hamans around us. But it's so hard for us to point to and see and recognize Haman in the mirror, to see that we all struggle with pride. None of us are immune to the great temptation and sin of pride, the poison of pride, and it is disastrous, so disastrous, as we will see. And so this morning, I want to challenge you to not hear this message and think of this in terms of who does this apply to, rather to see how does this apply to me? How am I Haman? So with that, we're going to pick up and start right where we left off we're going to pick up where we left off last week. But first, I want to just read 2 short verses from the book of Proverbs that point to the subtle snare and the great danger of pride. Proverbs 16:18 says, "Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit or an arrogant spirit before a fall." Likewise, in Proverbs 18:12, "Before a downfall, the heart is haughty, is arrogant, is puffed up. But humility comes before honor." We've already seen, starting last week, looking at Esther, we've already seen the great humility of Esther, and she is lifted up despite her humility. And then this morning, we're going to follow that up by looking at the sharp contrast with the great pride of Haman and where that leads him. So last week, if you remember, we left off with Esther, Queen Esther, and Mordecai and all of the Jews dispersed throughout the Persian Empire, fasting and praying for Esther as she prepares to go into the king's inner court uninvited, putting her own life at risk. As she has said, "I will go in to plead for the lives of God's people, despite the cost that it could have for me of my own life as the king. If the king has not invited you, it could cost you your life to come into his inner courts uninvited." And so at the end of this 3-day fast, she has said, "If I perish, I perish." Let's go ahead and pick up there in verse 1, chapter 5. "On the third day," that is the last day of the fast, "Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace, in front of the king's hall. And the king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall, facing the entrance. When he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her and held out to her the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter." And so we see here Esther putting her own life at great risk to plead for the lives of her people, to intercede for them, recognizing that God has raised her to this place of prominence and to this position for this very purpose and calling to plead with the king, even if it is to cost her her life. And the king gives her, he extends his scepter out to illustrate his approval of her, and that we see throughout this story, and we talked about this last week and continue to see it this morning, that throughout this book we see God giving Esther favor in everyone's eyes around her, including in the king's eyes. And so King Xerxes knows that she hasn't come and put her life at risk just to say hello. "Hey, haven't seen you in a while. How are you doing?" He knows that clearly she must have something on her heart that is heavy. She must have a request of him. Otherwise, there's no way she would have put herself at such risk to, uninvited, barge into his inner court. And so he asks her blatantly, what is your request? What is it that you want? But then he follows that up by saying, I will give you up to half of my kingdom. And so that's exactly what we want to see and hear as readers. We get excited, go, okay, she's going to give this. Let's go ahead and read verse 3. The king asked, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom will be given to you." And she responds, "If it pleases the king, let the king together with Haman come today to a banquet that I've prepared for them." Well, again, we get excited as readers going, he's asked her directly, what is it that you want? And he's even said, I'll give you up to half my kingdom. Now, that's an idiom in the language there, that up to half my kingdom. He probably wouldn't give her half, but he's saying, I will grant you your request, a generous request. You have favor in my eyes. I will give you your request. But Esther doesn't tell him exactly what's on her heart as we expect and as we want, but rather she shows incredible restraint and incredible patience and wisdom in holding back and not spilling the beans just yet, because the timing is not yet right. And so rather than jumping in and telling him exactly what's going on, she invites him and Haman to this special banquet. And I love how the king not only RSVPs for himself, but also Haman too. Whatever Haman's plans were, he's coming too today. And so the king is very curious. You can see this curiosity building in him as he can't wait to find out what her request will be. There's something else here in verse 4 that is of incredible interest and importance that I am excited to tell you about, but the time's not right. So come back next week, and I'm going to tell you more about it. And as it so happens to work out, we're having a banquet next Sunday after service. So I didn't work out that timing, but divine providence. Come back next Sunday and we'll talk more about verse 4. But with that, let's get back to the story. So the king is excited, intrigued about this banquet that he sends orders to Haman to come and attend the queen's special banquet for him. And how excited Haman must have been to receive this very exclusive invitation by the queen for just the three of them, the king, queen, and himself. And so he gets all dressed up and ready and goes to enjoy this meal, and they have this luxurious meal together and enjoy the king's wine. And again, for the second time, the king directly asks Esther, okay, what is your request? And again, he follows it up with, up to half my kingdom is yours. I will grant it. And again, as the listeners, we're excited. Okay, Esther, lay it out there. Tell him. Ask him to save the Jews. But again, she does not. She expresses great patience and reserve and wisdom. And again, she invites them to a second banquet rather than laying it all out there, which is a great risk when you think about it, that the king has already said, yes, I will grant it to you. Why would she wait? Couldn't he have a change of heart? Couldn't he get annoyed? This curiosity could quickly change to, now I no longer care what your request was. I'm tired of the continued delay and pushing it back. But God, as we will see as we continue in the story, God has more chess pieces to move into the right places for the timing to be right. This waiting isn't Esther waffling in her faith. It's not her going, I don't know if I want to go through with this or if I trust. She is being patient because that is precisely what God has called her to do, because there is more that he needs to move into place for that timing to be perfect. And that's what happens. And so Esther says in verse 8, again in chapter 5, if the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and to fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come again tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question. Well, as the king's curiosity grows, Haman's pride grows, and he just feels so special to have been invited to not one, but now two very exclusive royal banquets. And so he leaves the palace all puffed up and full of himself until on the way out he sees Mordecai, his arch nemesis, there at the gate, who again refuses to lower himself before Haman. And Haman, his great pride and excitement quickly turns to anger. And what we'll see here as we follow Haman is that he frequently shifts back and forth between anger and pride. We may not think of these two emotions, these two things as being related, but actually pride does lead to anger, especially as others don't hold you up as high as you hold yourself up. And if they don't treat you that way, it leads to anger. So we'll see Haman shift back and forth between his pride and anger. So angry, he goes home, but then he finds his wife and he calls for his friends all to be invited over, and he can't wait to tell them all about how amazing he is. And so in verse 11, Haman boasted to them, his wife and his friends, about his vast wealth. Of course, they already know that he's a wealthy man. That's nothing new. But he boasts to them about his vast wealth and his many sons, and all the ways the king has honored him and promoted him, and how he had elevated him above the other nobles and officials. Oh, but that's not all. But wait, there's more. And Haman added, I'm the only person that Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to the banquet she gave. And she has invited me along with the king again tomorrow. And so Haman is just so full of pride and so full of excitement about himself and all that he's accomplished and accumulated. And look at all my stuff and my money and my influence and my authority and power and honor that I have by the king over everyone else. And not just the king, but the queen also loves me and adores me, that she's invited me and only me to come with the king for these 2 consecutive royal banquets. He is the president of his own fan club. He's his own number 1 fan, all excited to talk about and boast about his greatness. He would have been wise to have heeded the words of Proverbs 27:2, which says, let someone else praise you and not your own mouth. Let an outsider and not your own lips. But when you are so caught up in lifting yourself up, then those around you who may even look up to you, it doesn't even give them a chance to. In fact, it hurts and it breaks down whatever respect they might have had for you. And maybe they would have complimented you if you didn't beat them to the punch. But the wise man, the wise woman, is humble, allowing others to lift them up without needing to lift themselves up for others to see. But again, after all of this boasting and bragging about himself, then he shifts back to anger again. And he tells them of how, can you believe, as great as I am, and even the king and queen love me and can't get enough of me, as great as I am, can you believe Mordecai has the audacity to refuse to bow before me, has the audacity to continually refuse to pay homage to me? And he shifts back to his great anger. And so his wife and his friends suggest that he build an execution site that is very public, that he can have Mordecai killed on. And while some translations render it as gallows, actually, the ancient Persians didn't execute via hanging. They more often executed via impaling on a sharp stake. So more likely is that he has constructed a sharp stake coming up from the ground, up on a high hill, 50 cubits to 75 feet up in the air. And so that he has lifted up this sharp stake that he plans to have Mordecai impaled upon. Very public to humiliate him who has embarrassed Haman. And so he goes along with their plan and does precisely what they had suggested. But then the king, after that, the king has a hard time sleeping and is restless. And of course, he can't just turn Netflix on. So instead, he calls for his servants to bring him his favorite reading materials about his favorite person, himself. I want to read about my reign. I want to read about all the great things that I have done. And so they bring him his well, let's go ahead. I'm getting excited. Let's move into verse 1 of chapter 6. That night the king could not sleep, and so he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought to him to read. It was found, recorded there, that Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. So the king can't sleep, and of all things, this is what he asks for, and this is what he does in his sleeplessness. And of all places for him to turn to, of all things for him to read, he's reminded of what Mordecai had done to save his life. Somehow in the shuffle, somehow in the mix, he had failed to recognize and reward Mordecai for saving him. And so he asks his servant in verse 3, what honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this? The king asked, and his servant said, nothing has been done for him. So the king says, who is that I hear in the outer court? Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to speak to the king about impaling Mordecai on the pole that he had just set up for him. So King Xerxes was shocked to find, how did I not recognize and reward Mordecai? How did I not even think about that? And this was important not just because it makes sense that he owes recognition to Mordecai, but this was important and seen as being extremely important for kings to reward those, because it celebrates and encourages others to do likewise. If you want to be honored like Mordecai is going to be honored, then you also need to be loyal to me. So this is extremely important. It's valued by Persian kings that I need to recognize and reward those who are loyal to me. And what is there more loyal than Mordecai saving his life from some of his own officers who had conspired against him? And so what incredible timing it is that while he's having this conversation early in the morning, Haman is outside the outer court. He's come early. Why is he there so early? Well, the text tells us he has come early to talk to the king about this great plot that he has to impale Mordecai, to shame him and to kill him publicly for all to see up high. But the king, at the same time, is plotting how to publicly honor him, how to publicly lift him up in a positive way, not lift him up to impale him. And so the king orders his servant to go out and bring Haman in. But he doesn't ask Haman why he's there. What's so urgent? No, the king is too excited to ask Haman something himself. And so he asks Haman, what should be done for the man whom the king wishes to honor? And Haman gets excited. That catches him off guard, that question. Well, who else could the king want to honor but me? The text actually says that. Who could possibly be worthy of the king's honor more than me? He knows what big of a deal I am. And so he doesn't hold back anything. He just lays it out there, the best honor he can possibly think of, that he can conjure up. He lays out there thinking all along that he is planning his own party. In verse 8, he says to the king, have them bring a royal robe the king has worn, and a horse that the king has ridden, one with a royal crest on its head. Then the robe and the horse will be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor, and let that person lead him on horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. And you can just hear the excitement in Haman's voice and see the big grin on his face as he's planning this out. And this big, grandiose, very public for everybody in the streets to hear and see how great he is and honored he is. He who has just had 2 consecutive private dinners, or has had one, is about to have the other. And so he's just so excited about this. But that pride and excitement is short-lived as it gives way to embarrassment and shock when he finds out that the party he's been planning is not his own. And the king orders him to do everything that he has suggested. The king loves the idea. That's great. Do everything you have said and make sure that you do not fall short in any detail. Do all of it exactly as you said. Do it for my servant Mordecai. And so not only is he now frustrated and embarrassed and caught off guard that not only is he not going to be honored like he thought and wanted, but now his mortal enemy, Mordecai, is going to receive the honor that he was so excited about receiving himself. And even worse than that, Haman is the one who has to parade him around the city, proclaiming to everybody how great his enemy is. How incredibly the tables have turned in this story. And that God brings the proud low and the humble high. And so Haman is so embarrassed as he goes through this parade and tells everyone how great his enemy is, and he is so embarrassed. He runs home in shame, covering his face, and he goes home to the same group of people that he boasted to, that he bragged to. He goes home to his wife and his friends, and in tears, embarrassed and shamed, he tells them what happened. And as they're talking, the king's servants come to fetch Haman to bring him to this banquet. But Haman, instead of receiving the public honor, just as he was planning for and excited about his public honor, instead received public shame. And Mordecai received what he had been so excited about. So and now he lays that out before his friends and family to hear. But you have to wonder, as he's now on his way back to the palace, is he starting to breathe easier? Is he starting to, that was hard, that was rough, but at least I'm going back to another special, private, exclusive, royal event. You have to wonder if he is starting to, again, feel a little bit better as he goes and shares this meal, drinks the king's wine, and the king, again, a third time, asks Queen Esther directly, "What is your request? What is it that you want? Up to half the kingdom I will give you, it is yours." But this time the queen answers the question, because now the timing is perfect, and God has moved all of these pieces right into place with the king's sleeplessness and finding what Mordecai had done, with now honoring Mordecai, with Haman's great pride growing and boasting and building this execution site for his great enemy. All of these things have been building up to what is about to happen. And so now is the time, or Esther finally shares her request. Verse 3, Queen Esther answered the king, "If I have found favor with you, your majesty, if it pleases you to grant me my life, this is my petition, and spare my people. This is my request. Grant me my life and spare my people." You see, what the king was expecting was that she would ask for money, she would ask for power, she would ask for authority, she would ask for trinkets and treasures, all the things that he would have asked for, that he was so proud of himself in his great banquet and tour of his kingdom. But he was completely caught off guard that what she wanted was far more precious than any of these treasures. What she wanted and pled for was human life, to be protected, her life. The Jews' lives that had been sentenced to death by Haman's actions, by his talking the king into having all of the Jews killed. And so she asked for something far more precious. Remember, up until this point, the king doesn't know that she's a Jew. She has kept that a secret up until this point. And now the king's curiosity gives way to his anger, and he is furious. And so he responds, asking, who is it who has done this, who has conspired to this? And she says, it is that wicked enemy Haman. And the king storms out angry. And as he goes out into the garden, Haman falls before Esther and starts to plead and beg, which is ironic because what he was so upset about was that the Jew Mordecai wouldn't fall before him. But now he is falling before Queen Esther, begging for mercy. Well, the king comes back in, and before the king can say anything, his servant, let's go ahead and turn to verse 9. Then Harbana, one of the eunuchs attending the king, said, a pole reaching a height of 50 cubits, 75 feet high, stands by Haman's house. He set it up for Mordecai, who spoke up for the king, who saved the king. And the king says, well, impale him on it. So they impaled Haman on the pole that he had set up for Mordecai. Then the king's fury subsided. Again, the tables have completely turned, shifted upside down. In this great reversal, we see that Haman had unknowingly, just like he unknowingly planned this party that he wasn't the center of, he also unknowingly planned his own execution, his own death. Pride comes before fall. The public shame, the public execution that he planned for Mordecai, he fell on himself. But pride has a way of blinding us from seeing the truth. And hatred does as well, as he hates Mordecai. Pride has a way of blinding us from seeing what it's doing to us and the great poison that it is and the trap and the snare that it is that leads us to our own downfall and destruction. Pride has a way of growing in the dark, and we don't even realize that it is growing within us. We don't see it. We don't see the danger of it. But that is one of the reasons why pride is so incredibly dangerous and destructive. And all of us are susceptible to pride. All of us have in us, if we're not careful and we're not looking in the mirror and asking God, is there anything in me? Is there any pride or arrogance? Is there any selfishness in me that seeks to take glory that belongs to you? As you see, when we follow Jesus, there is no room in our lives for arrogance. There is no room in our lives to seek our own glory parties. But we are to be seeking his glory. You see, the people in my life who I have known who have been the most humble people I have met, it has struck me to hear them say they've struggled with pride. And you might think, well, that's just false humility of, well, if I say that I struggle with pride, then it makes me look more humble, right? But I think actually the more humble we are, the more sensitive we are to pride in our lives. The more we recognize it, and the more cautious we are of it because we know of its destructive capability in our lives. We have a healthier awareness of it. Jesus, in talking to his disciples, and they're fighting and arguing over who is greater, and tells them that the greatest among you is the servant among you. If you want to be first, you need to be last. For those who are last will be first, and first shall be last. Listen to what the prophet Jeremiah, God says to the prophet Jeremiah in Jeremiah 9:23 and 24. Says, this is what the Lord says. Let not the wise boast in their wisdom, or the strong boast of their strength, or the rich boast of their riches. But let the one who boasts boast in this, that they have the understanding, the wisdom to know me, that I am the Lord who exercises kindness, justice, and righteousness on earth. For in these I delight, declares the Lord. And if we are to boast in anything, it is in Christ. It is in who he is and what he has done. The glory belongs to him. This morning, again, I want to challenge us to ask God to shine his light in every corner of our heart, not just of our actions, but also our words and our thoughts, our desires, and as we even, again, think about pride, and we want to think, well, this pertains to so-and-so and so-and-so. They need to be more humble like I am. But in reality, each and every one of us has pride and arrogance and selfishness that we need to submit before God and allow him to mold and shape us more in his likeness as a humble servant as he served. Would you bow with me? God, we come before you and thank you that you are so great, that you are so incredible, that you are so amazing, that, Lord, you deserve all of the glory that we can possibly give to you, that we can find to honor you, Lord. You deserve it all. And Lord, would you shine your light in us to reveal to us any way in us, any thought, any motivation, any desire, anything, Lord, that seeks to lift ourselves up over others. We think of ourselves better than others. Lord, anything in us that would detract from the glory that you deserve. Lord, may we more faithfully represent you and lift you up high for people to see you and not to be impressed with us, but to be impressed with you. You deserve all the honor and glory. We love you, Lord. It's in your name that we pray. Amen.